ولا يهتدون سبيلا فأولئك عسى الله أن يعفو عنهم وكان الله عفوا غفورا. Those Allah will, out of His mercy, have forgiveness for, because Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. This is Allah. He will forgive those who are in that state, not out of choice. So, what is in front of us? We have in front of us Muslims in a non-Muslim society, the example of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ of Hijrah, based on Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's statement that he absolves himself, ana bari'un, from whoever dies in the midst of the disbelievers. Meaning they chose that. Because in his time, when Hijrah was made, we had the Hijrah to Ethiopia, then the Hijrah to Medina. When the Hijrah to Medina was made, it was compulsory for Muslims who had any means to make that Hijrah to make the Hijrah. And the Hijrah is something which did not end in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Hijrah remains for Muslims until the last days of this earth. So it is something that we have to look at historically. We know this continent went through a period of change where it divided and formed different nations. India, Pakistan, then Pakistan, Bangladesh, so on and so on. As Muslims, it is necessary to readdress and to re-look at that process of what took place, and to form a proper opinion, a guided opinion as to the past, so that we will better know how to deal with the future. But if we look at the options from the Meccan model of either staying and struggling here or leaving, moving elsewhere, whether it is out of the country or it is within the country, because Hijrah doesn't necessarily mean everybody has to pack up their bags and leave India. It could mean moving to some other location in India. Meaning if you are oppressed in one location, go to another location where there are more Muslims, you have more of a community, you can feel safer in the practice of your Islam. That is real. Of course, such a move means sacrifice, because maybe your business is here, all your relatives and all your connections and everything, your roots are here. So for you to pick up and go elsewhere in India, you feel this is going to be personal loss to yourself, economic loss, and so you don't move. But you think Allah will accept that reason on the Day of Judgment because you feared economic loss? Allah goes on to say in the 100th verse, the verse which wasn't read in the beginning, after talking about this Hijrah, He then praised those who made that sacrifice for the Hijrah, saying, وَمَنْ يُهَاجِرْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ يَجِدْ فِي الْأَرْضِ مُرَاغَمًا كَثِيرًا وَسَعًا. That whoever makes Hijrah for the sake of Allah will find in this earth many places of refuge and economic, social, etc. opportunities. This is Allah's promise. وَمَنْ يَخْرُجْ مِنْ بَيْتِهِ مُهَاجِرًا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. That whoever leaves his or her home, making hijrah for the sake of Allah and His Messenger, ثُمَّ يُدْرِكْهُ الْمَوْتِ, and death catches him, فَقَدْ وَقَعَ أَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. His or her reward is guaranteed from Allah. Reward of what? Reward of paradise. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. And Allah is most forgiving, most merciful. So we shouldn't fear. If we truly find difficulty, find we're not able to practice Islam properly, find our children are losing it or going astray, for economic reasons and social reasons, we should not hesitate to make that hijrah for the sake of Allah. Because Allah has promised us success. And if we believe in Allah, then how can we doubt what He has promised? Now, for those who were not able to make the hijrah in the Meccan period, what did they do? They developed, with the guidance of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, a strategy for survival. He taught them. They clustered together as best as they could, educating each other, living, helping each other economically. Those who were in a state of servitude were being tortured, their freedom was bought, and there was this cooperation, community cooperation there, which linked them all together, even though they were physically in different circumstances within the Meccan society. So in a similar manner, Muslims who see before them no opportunity for making hijrah, we are here. The mass of Muslims are not able to go anywhere. What do? We have to develop strategies for survival. How to survive? What should be our goal here? We should have a clear goal. If we don't have a clear goal, then we are in a state of loss. So it is essential for us to identify what should be our goals here in this circumstance, in this non-Muslim society. And the primary goal should be the establishment of Islam. It is essential for us to see that as our goal. So it is our responsibility to establish Islam in the localities that we are, if we're not able to make any form of hijrah. And even if we make the hijrah is to establish it elsewhere, in another community, to be a part of an effort to establish Islam in that other community. Because Islam is community. It is something which may be implemented on an individual level if there's no community. Because what we cannot do, which requires community activity, where there is no community, Allah is most merciful. But when we look at all of the basic practices of Islam, from the Shahada, the declaration of faith. The declaration of faith is not something you do inside your heart and carry on. It is something which must be done to the community. The establishment of Salah, the prayer, the establishment of prayer is in the masjids, in Jama'ah, in community. Fasting requires somebody to see the moon, to inform the community. Breaking the fast, we have Zakatul Fitr, feeding the community. Zakah, taking from our wealth to give to whom? The community. Hajj, the world community of Muslims, worshipping Allah together. Islam is about community.
Back to the Prophet. Join Sheikh Amar in the program Back to the Prophet, wherein he teaches us practical lessons from the Prophet's life and how this can help us to overcome our challenges in the present.
We talk about the life example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, seeking guidance for ourselves. In the early days after the revelation of the Holy Quran, the Muslims were greatly persecuted, so much so that quite a few Muslims had to leave Arabia and migrate to Africa to live among Ahl Kitab, Christian people who followed the gospel of Christ.
So we have to define or identify the proper methodology given our circumstances here for achieving those goals, the goals of establishing Islam on an individual level as well as on a community level. The first step is what? It is education. This is the first step, is education. This is where the establishment of Islam begins, in education. Why? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "Talabul ilmi farida ala kulli Muslim." Seeking knowledge is compulsory for every Muslim. مَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whomsoever Allah wishes good for, He gives him or her a good understanding, a deep understanding of the religion. خَيْرُكُمْ مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَهُ. The best of you is he or she who learns the Quran and teaches it to others. Education. Education. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ also said, "Ad-dunya mal'una." This world is cursed. Mal'unun ma fiha. All in it is cursed. Illa dhikrullah wa ma wala. Except for the remembrance of Allah and what helps us to remember Allah. Wa aliman wa muta'allima. And the teacher and the student. Education. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ elevated education to the level of ibadah, saying that whoever takes a path seeking knowledge, man salaka tariqan yaltamisu fihi ilman, sahhala Allahu lahu tariqan ila al-jannah. Allah will make easy for him or her the path to paradise. The prophets, alayhimus salam, brought knowledge, and with it, in its implementation, there arose faith. By the grace of Allah, the faith which is acceptable to Allah is the one based on divine knowledge. So our priority in terms of knowledge is the deen. I know people will say, "Talabul ilm farida ala kulli Muslim," and that means, okay, we should become doctors and lawyers and everything else. This is where we should be. It's knowledge. Yes, it is knowledge. But the beginning is knowledge of the deen. This is priority. Because even in the seeking of knowledge, in the gaining of knowledge, we have to put it on different levels of priority. There is knowledge which is essential for us in both this life and the next. And there is knowledge which is useful or essential for us in this life and not in the next. Which one are you going to put priority on? The one which is essential for both this life and the next. That is knowledge of the deen. And when we approach this knowledge, we have to realistically look at our circumstance. Where do we gain our knowledge from? Some people say we gain it from our foreparents. My parents were Muslims, and I grew up in their family. I do what they did. But we have to question ourselves. Were our parents Sahaba? Meaning they got whatever they did from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? We have to question ourselves. No. They weren't. So what does that mean? It means then that we cannot simply say, I'm going to follow whatever my parents did. That this is my source of gaining knowledge of Islam. Because if my parents didn't get their knowledge from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then there is a possibility that their knowledge is incorrect. This is something we have to realistically look at. And there was a particular incident which took place in the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, narrated by Abu Waqid al-Laythi. This is found in At-Tirmidhi and An-Nasai, authentic, in which he reported that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he and the companions set out for Hunain, they were going to that last battle in the 10th year of the Hijrah after the conquest of Mecca. They were going to the last major battle with the pagans. On their way, they came across a tree. This tree was referred to in Arabic as Dhat Anwat. You could call it the hanging tree, the tree on which things were hung. Dhatu Anwat. The pagans used to hang their weapons on it before they went to battles, etc. They used to go and hang their weapons on it, their shields, their swords, whatever, believing that in hanging it on this tree had special powers that would infuse inside of their weapons and made their swords sharper and their shields better, more to protect them against the arrows or the swords, etc. This was their belief. Now, amongst the Sahaba were some who had recently converted to Islam. It was after the conquest of Mecca. They converted to Islam. They went on out with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam immediately. So they asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when they saw the tree, and they knew that this was a tree for pagans. And as Muslims, obviously, this was the tree for pagans. You can't, as a Muslim, deal with it. So what they did was they asked Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "O Messenger of Allah, can you set aside a tree for us?" They wanted an Islamic tree to hang their weapons on. Okay? These are people who had just converted to Islam. They understood the general issues of paganism. But this concept was lost on them. They didn't quite understand it. So, understanding that this happened in the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was there. He corrected it and gave them the proper direction, the proper understanding. And they conveyed that to the generations that came after them. But in the intervening generations, as Islam spread out of Arabia throughout the rest of the world, and people came into Islam in different places, like India, do you think that what happened to those Sahaba in that first generation, those who had newly accepted Islam in Mecca, do you think what happened to them didn't happen to Muslims here in India? You see, these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves when we look at the source from which we are going to take our knowledge of Islam. We're going to learn Islam, we're going to build Islam in ourselves. We recognize that as a necessity. But where do we take it from? Where is the pure source? The spring of life, where is it? It is in the Quran and in the Sunnah. This is where it is. It is in the Quran and in the Sunnah. This is revelation from Allah. This is where salvation, where life lies. And we have to be very careful that we don't fall into the same situation which the pagans exhibited in the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as referred to in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 104, wherein Allah describes the response of the pagans to the call to the Quran and the Sunnah. If we said this is the source of life, and the pagans who went astray, who died in a state of disbelief and went to hell, their response we should be well aware of. What was their response? Allah says in Surah Al-Ma'idah, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ وَإِلَى الرَّسُولِ. And if you say to them, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, come to what Allah has revealed and to His Messenger, to the Quran and to the Sunnah. قالوا, their response, حسبنا ما وجدنا عليه آباءنا. It is enough for us what we found our foreparents doing. It is enough for us what we found our foreparents doing. This was the response of the pagans. This was the response of disbelief. This was the response which caused Abu Talib to go to hell. Abu Talib, who raised Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who knew who he was, who knew he was a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But on his deathbed, when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ invited him and said, say La ilaha illallah, uncle, say La ilaha illallah, and I will be a witness with you before Allah on the day of judgment. And Abu Talib's brothers were there saying to him, are you going to embarrass our family? Are you going to degrade our family? Are you going to reject the ways of our foreparents? Were our foreparents all wrong? Was Abdul Muttalib wrong? Was Abdul Manaf wrong? Were they all wrong? Are you going to reject that? And Abu Talib chose to go with the way of his foreparents. And what was the result? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that he receives the least punishment on the day of judgment. The least. For the good that he did in terms of raising the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, protecting him, etc., etc. He received the least. But what is the least? Described in Sahih Muslim. That the hellfire will reach up to his ankles. Only his ankles will be in the hellfire. But it will be enough for his brains to boil. And he will think that he is receiving the worst punishment of anybody in hell. That is the result. That is the consequence of that response. حسبنا ما وجدنا عليه آباءنا.